Let us look at the first part of mirroring. And this is very important to understand that in early life, when the child is trying to show off himself, experience is natural exhibitionism. He is trying to show off his own body, his own skills, something that he has created, something that he does. And he expects people to be around to see it and admire him. And that activity, when others acknowledge you, admire you, is called mirroring. They mirror back to us our desire to believe that we are good, that we are special, we have something good in us. And this approval and validation from the others is very important. So mirroring involves these 5 A's. If you look at mirroring as a full process, it includes 5 A's. Acknowledgement that you exist. Nobody neglects you as though you are living in a corner unacknowledged. So acknowledgement is very important. Second, not only people acknowledge that you exist, they give attention to you. You are not seen as a necessary evil, rather they give attention to you because you are worthy of getting attention. They accept you as you are. They give affection to you and they admire you. All the 5, they constitute mirroring. And failure in any component here can result in a mirroring failure, and it will come up in therapy. And Kohut says any mirroring failure can contribute to creation of an unhealthy self. Now, how do we understand this? If you look at mirroring, essentially it is acknowledgement of our existence and acknowledgement of our worth, our getting good emotions from others, good emotional relationship, and admiration, very important, I am good enough. And if we don't get this I am good enough, as a reaction to it, one can develop narcissism. And on this continuum of fame to shame, which we all are all our lives, right from childhood till the last breath, we have to move towards fame in childhood and then come back to the realistic position. So on one corner is fame, on the other extreme is shame, and in between is the normal zone of everyday reality. So we have to experience fame and come back to reality. If that fails, we are thrown towards the end of shame. And if we experience shame very intensely, then as a reaction to it, because here we experience deep sense of shame and I am not good enough, as a response to it, we can develop many personality disorders, one of which is narcissism. So the core of I am good enough comes from mirroring, early life mirroring. From a client's point of view, millennial client's point of view, we are talking also of the presence of a good object who acknowledges us, gives us all these things. So we are then encouraged to relate to the good, reliable, stable object. So first we acknowledge the presence of the good, reliable, stable object. If we find a good mirroring object, we relate to the good, reliable, stable object and we internalize the good, reliable, stable object, which according to client becomes the core of our good health. And in Kohut's terms, once we find a good mirroring object, we are able to internalize the mirroring, and a transmuting internalization then makes that mirrored admiration our own, that mirrored acknowledgement our own. And then if that transmuting internalization successfully happens, we no longer need this from outside in large quantities. And contrary to this, if it does not go on well, if this 5 there is a deficit, we come then to conclude I am not good enough. We develop intense feelings of shame, and then that can result in any kind of pathology, mostly personality disorders. And then we are not able to conclude that we are in presence of a good object, rather we feel we are in the presence of a bad object, and then either we don't relate or we relate to a bad object using defenses and distorting our personality, and then internalization of a good, reliable, stable object cannot take place. So the same cohesion thing, we can look at it from point of view of Klein also. And of course, some of the phenomena are the same thing said in different ways. Some of them partly overlap. Second is idealization. Kohut says if idealization cannot happen well, it can lead to creation of unhealthy self. So how does idealization happen? The child has inborn omnipotence. The child realizes it is not omnipotent but wants to experience omnipotence. So it projects omnipotence on somebody and identifies with that person to experience omnipotence. And then the healthy thing is that slowly the child realizes that the person outside is not omnipotent. And slowly he moves from an omnipotent assessment of the person to a realistic assessment of the person. And it starts with internalizing the omnipotent object and slowly learns to internalize the real object. The child acknowledges that there is somebody outside who has ideals, who believes in something, who is stable in certain ways, predictable in certain ways, good enough in certain ways. And that acknowledgement of goodness outside helps the child in activating the moral ego strength, super ego strength inside, the moral complex inside. And those two also are very important parts in creating a healthy self. It's almost, mostly underplayed how much super ego strength is important in creation of a healthy self. We talk of super ego pathology, not so much of super ego strength, but it's very important in creating the overall ego strength. It assists in super ego development, so it does not become too harsh or too weak, does not lead to super ego pathology. Because the person believes in ideals, the person is worthy of idealization, ideas of reliability and stability take root. If you don't have it, one gets into confusion and perplexity what to do, what is correct and what is not correct. But here you have clarity, you have reliability, you have stability, because idealization has happened well. So if it happens well, you develop good superego strength, good superego development, feelings of reliability, stability in the outside world, internalized later on, and you feel clarity. You don't feel confusion and perplexity. And presence of a good object that is worthy of idealization, relate to it, internalize it, identify with it, make it your own, transmuting internalization happens. So idealization is second process which can be so understood, which is important for development of healthy self. Kohut talks about three kinds of object experiences without using the word object experiences. He talks about self-object experiences, twinship experiences, and alter ego experiences, all of which are different types of object experiences. Self-object experience successfully done leads to establishment in the inner world of I am in control, I am not powerless, I am not helpless, the world will not overwhelm me, and I will not be able to not control the world. And slowly from that omnipotent position to realistic power is the natural movement towards a healthy self. But the object has to be worth relating to, pleasant enough, and it should be such that you are able to control it, influence it. Then you can have successful self-object experiences. In a way, we need psychological slaves for some time. It's a crude and negative way of putting it, but it is so. Twinship experiences. Here we experience delightful fusion, a delightful relating with the other. Relating becomes delightful, playful, energy bringing, positive, exploratory, very healthy. The other becomes a catalyst to bring out a lot of things in you. The other is pleasant to be with. He is the archetypal playmate. Something deep in the collective unconscious also gets satisfied. Don't believe in the collective unconscious, just say something deep in the mind gets satisfied. It's almost like we talk of yin and yang jigsaw puzzle completing each other. Similarly, here there is a playmate need getting completed inside. Here the feeling is the object is like me. So I am not alone in the world. I belong to a community. There is a group of people like me. And we have a strong relationship. So we are all secure. We will help each other. It will help our survival and our progress and our happiness. We will get all the benefits of relating and being together. And we can share things. And there is empathy for each other. Alter ego experiences. Twinship experiences are with the other. Self-object experiences are with the half other. Alter ego experiences are with the other, but like us.
So what do we mean by half other?
In self-object, the object is not completely autonomous. The object is somebody who does things to obey us and please us, and therefore we put the hyphen.
Okay.
The other who is an extension of us. It is not completely autonomous, the other. And this is what we want in most relationships. We don't want to relate to the other. We want the other to be an obedient, pleasing other. We want the other to become a self-object. We don't want to relate to actually the other object. The third object experience Kohut talks about is the alter ego experience. The other is independent other. He is not an obedient other like the self-object, but he is somebody like me. He is the other, but he is like the self. He is the other, but he is like the self. And in my absence, he is likely to do something that I would have done. So in my absence, he becomes like the other self-object. and we both belong to some select aristocratic group, we are special. And there is a great narcissistic satisfaction in looking at him, seeing him somebody exactly like us, and even reveling in the success of that person, as though that person will carry the flame forward and my self will survive beyond me, because his self is almost like myself. So there is a narcissistic perpetuation of the self, a narcissistic multiplication of the self. And if these experiences happen well, you can see a lot of things happen. I am in control. I am realistically powerful. I am not helpless. I experience delight in relating. I am not alone. Somebody is like me. He will carry the self beyond me. So all these experiences happen well, leads to a healthy self. Any questions?
No, sir.
Kohut talks about the arc of tension or the bipolar self. Bipolar does not mean the bipolar as we understand in DSM. So I have not used that word here, but I use the word arc of tension. Kohut says there should be a healthy tension between your goals and competencies. So goals and ideals on one side and the competencies on the other, and there should be a healthy stretching of one's competencies. And that leads, so when you have an arc of tension and you successfully work through it, you successfully complete the project, whatever the project is, it creates, enhances the ego strength, enhances self-confidence, enhances the good parts of the personality. So the superego strength enhances. There has to be stretch to enhance our competence. And this happens very well if our surrounding environment in early childhood appreciates our sense of industry, our sense of initiative taking, is appreciated, supported, and admired. If this happens, we start enjoying the arc of tension. If this does not happen, we start disliking the arc of tension. We actually develop anxiety or dislike for the arc of tension. The arc enhances the self, does not disintegrate it if done healthily. But if it is not done in a healthy way, if the environment is not appreciative, supportive, admiring, then the arc can actually disintegrate us. And this is what happens in case of many adults. The moment you give them some work to do, the self disintegrates. Any responsibility you do, disintegration starts. Partially, I'm not saying fully, partially it starts. Successful experience of the arc of tension prepares us for the professional life. A successful experience with the arc of tension creates a good balance between the home and the outside. The arc of tension is an arc of healthy challenge and growth. Challenge should not be so intense that you cannot overcome it, have a negative experience and disintegrate. It also helps us overcome pathological narcissism because we have to work to get results. We have to slowly develop our capability. We are not inborn 10 out of 10. Arc of tension brings into our psychic life reality and logos into the eros. It has to be created after the arc of tension should be presented to the person after the fundamental operations of eros, like mirroring, idealization, the basic part of that is complete. It should not be brought to the child too early. So arc of tension has to be introduced to the child after the fundamental eros experiences are successfully done. So it is essentially a childhood experience after the infancy is complete. If done well, prepares you for the outside world, creates a healthy self. Impingement. Now, impingement essentially is intrusion. The child is playing and you intrude into him again and again. So what does it do? It disrupts what Winnicott says, going on being. Slowly the self is consolidating, cohesion is increasing, and you at the same time attack it, it disintegrates. And this brings to us the idea that probably different constituents come together to create a self or the social ego. And there are two ideas related to it, we'll see later, but for the moment it's like the cohesion is taking place, different parts are coming together to become one. They have just joined together and you intrude and it disintegrates. And that is true even in adult life. Too much of intrusion creates disintegration. So the other extreme is also correct. If there is nobody around and you feel abandoned and lonely, that also leads to disintegration. So the self remains cohesive and healthy when adequate amount of human contact is there, but it is not intrusive. Impingement can cause irritation and anger, and if it cannot be expressed towards the other, the anger turns on oneself and disintegrates the self. And this is a very important point to note, that the self may get disintegrated not because of a challenge only from outside, but also because of repressed affect that turns on oneself, and it can turn on oneself in various ways. The repressed affect can turn on any organ. It may just create symptoms physiologically or neurologically, or it may attack any structural component of the psychic system, like in this case, the self. Often we have children who are victims of passive-aggressive parents, or children who are victims of anxious parents, or children who are victims of intruding parents. All the three children, group of children, they face the problems of impingement. The self disintegrating because of repeated intrusion, the self disintegrating because of irritation and anger towards the intruder, which cannot be expressed and therefore turns inward on one's own self. Therefore, expression of affect related to impingement is very important. If we don't want impingement to convert into disintegration, one way out is to allow expression of affect. And this is true of expression of affect related to any failure of parenting. If it is expressed out, the chances of the affect turning inwards and then disintegrating the self is less. Repressed negative affect of any type disintegrates the self. And ego strength can be enhanced by expressing that affect and also by practicing to feel how the disintegration happens and to visualize and will the reintegration to happen if disintegration happens. It's a very good awareness, mindfulness and visualization and intention exercise to enhance the ego strength and ego resilience. Repeated small attacks of adult years can actually connect to the earlier attacks of impingement of childhood, and the two put together can also result in disintegration of the self. So when small attacks of the adult life are not enough to cause disintegration, At times they can link up with childhood impingement and cause disintegration. Successful passing through of impingement creates a sort of immunity against future irritation. And obviously, if you pass successfully through this and don't suffer from it, you get into a healthy self. If this creates trouble for you in early childhood, chances are you may develop an unhealthy self. And we are in a situation of over-determinism. We have discussed this before, that all the factors which lead to formation of healthy self or unhealthy self, it is not only a multifactorial situation, it is a situation of over-determinism. Each factor can contribute to something, and each factor independently can also lead to something. So each factor can contribute to causing something, and collectively they may cause, or any one factor can individually also cause something. Empathy. When somebody shows empathy, the self comes out in the front and develops, and we feel good about it. Almost as though the self hides out of fear of attack and comes in the front in the presence of empathy and safety. And the empathy is empathy is not only not attacking, but there are various meanings of the word empathy. One way of empathy is to feel what somebody is feeling and appreciate it with kindness and understanding. Second meaning of empathy is not attacking, and there are many other meanings. Let us look at it. Empathy is understanding. Empathy is non-attacking. Empathy is also understanding with attunement with the other, what you can say at one meant. You get actually into the shoes of the other to understand the other. It's a skill of attunement. Deeper empathy is not just holding, it's a deeper attunement. A very dynamic containment is a very active and dynamic part of empathy. Not only you contain, but you process what is being contained. Take in the negative thing, contain it, process it, give back the positive thing. So it's a very dynamic containment. It's not just a mechanical storehouse. One of the important elements is that many mothers and many parents are not comfortable with a cohesive self, but are comfortable with a partly disintegrated self. So if the mother is comfortable with cohesive self and not with disintegrated self, it's a very good thing for the child. Unfortunately, most people are comfortable with partially disintegrated self and not comfortable with a cohesive self. And therefore what they do is, when they see a person with a stable, peaceful, cohesive self, they actually attack the person to disintegrate the self, and then they feel comfortable. Much of it is envy, much of it is narcissistic rage, much of it is habit. Empathy provides security that the world is a safe place. Not only to feel safe being oneself, but to be industrious, make mistakes, and yet not expect an attack. So not only personal safety, but also professional safety. Empathy provides a safe world. It allows us to institute these things in our mind. The world is a safe place. The world is a good place. The world is a kind place. The world is a gentle place. It helps us to internalize the empathic environment and the empathic persons into a self-soothing core inside of us. And all of this leads to creation of a healthy self with high cohesion and less propensity to disintegrate. So how do we consolidate the whole thing? First, we talked about the self-definition, self-location, self and the ego. We discussed this. And there are two ways of looking at self-creation. We have talked about factors which affect self-creation, but how does actual self-creation happen? In an essential philosophical logical sense, we can look at self-creation in two ways. One, there are constituents of the self which naturally get produced and they come together to create a self, and on the borderline there is some adhesive phenomena happening where different constituents adhere, become one. Or the second way of looking at a self is that there is one small organic entity which grows over a period of time to become a large entity. We don't know what future will tell us, but these are two broad ways of looking at the creation of the self in an essential way. And disintegration can be of various types. It can be spontaneous. It can be in response to challenge or in response to tragedy. Spontaneous disintegration can happen if the adhesion fails at some point, or something is chipped off because of an attack, or some inner events undo the cohesion. Laka used this phrase, some people come undone. That undoing can be because of some inner events, where a successfully created self somehow gets undone partly or fully from the inside. And that does not only involve attack of negative effects like anger, pain or something. It can also involve very deep-seated pain and resignation. So we talked about cohesion and disintegration. It's a zero-sum game. More cohesion, less disintegration. And the more disintegration, the more we move towards psychosis. The more cohesion, the more we move towards health. And disintegration can be of different types. Spontaneous in psychosis, only in response to a inner or outer challenge, and less occasional than psychosis in borderline, and only in response to tragedy, inside or outside, in case of narcissistic self. There's also this idea of fragmentation, which Kohut has not put forward, but I have put forward. I feel it's an important one. That there can be, because of creation of unhealthy self, because of lack of cohesion, there can be a gulf in the personality. Different parts of the personality are not integrated together. And that can be one manifestation of the unhealthy self, that there is fragmentation in the self. And that can lead in the extreme to multiple personality. It can also lead to persona and the authentic self being different. So different kind of gulfs can institute themselves in the personality, in case of normal individual, also in case of troubled individuals. And fragmentation is easier to deal with than disintegration. And therefore it is more likely to happen when cohesion is better and the factors leading to creation of unhealthy self have not had a strong effect in childhood. Constitution also is important. Kohut has written a book, very famous book, Restoration of the Self. That if an unhealthy self is created, then what do we do to create a healthy self? And this we see very important, this topic of restoration of the self in patients who are fragile, and that includes patients with psychosis, patients with borderline pathology, patients with personality disorders. Most of them are fragile. And this group requires a restoration of the self. And for that, the tool is cohesion therapy, where understanding of free association is very different from classical psychoanalytic therapy. Holding is practiced in contrast to psychoanalytic therapy far more. Gratification by omission is allowed to the patient. Leaving it out is allowed. We don't stick to the classical principle of reflecting, not acting. Leaving it out is thought of to be a part of healing. And dream interpretation also is done in a cohesion way. So these 5 elements are strictly cohesion and very different from the classical psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And with these 5, we do cohesion therapy and we work for restoration of the self. Any questions you have?
Sir, right now, no question. I'll go through it once more myself.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
It again says the 2 minutes. So let us break for 15 minutes and then come back.
Okay, sir. Okay.